we've acquired 3,192 Bitcoin. So we own over $300 million of Bitcoin. We got to do this. We got to buy Bitcoin. There's no better use of our cash. I've been an investor for 25 years. I meet with CEOs and CFOs all the time. Now, more frequently, I ask them point blank, why don't you consider taking all that cash and buying Bitcoin? Where you see companies start to take some of their cash and buy Bitcoin is the repeal of SAB 121. Once that changes, which should happen in the next few months, I think you were actually going to see very big companies taking some cash and buying Bitcoin. When Bitcoin is at $1 million, it'll probably have replaced gold as a store of value. It'll probably be something that is less volatile. When there's a tariff crisis or there's violence in the Middle East and Bitcoin is the only thing trading on the weekend, and it expresses the fears out there that investors have in the markets as they head into the week, it may be a different story. It may act like gold by then. If it's at $1 million, it's probably proven itself enough that all of a sudden it's a place you go to hide. We started out with a $75 million offering. It was multiple times oversubscribed and ended up raising $100 million. At one point, we might have been down 25% on our first purchase of Bitcoin. And to our board's credit, they didn't flinch. They just wanted to buy more. Fourth quarter that we made a $29 million gain on the Bitcoin we had purchased last year.
Let's just directly jump into what you currently did with the convertible offerings and getting into the top 10 of Bitcoin holders, as we discussed before we started the recording. But maybe before we get started with those topics, let's just quickly get, for the few Bitcoiners that still don't know you, who are you and who is Semler Scientific and what are you doing?
Sure. I'm the chairman of Semler Scientific. It's a public company. The ticker is SMLR. It's been public for almost 10 years, and it's a medical device and software business. And about a year ago, in May 2024, less than a year ago, we decided to adopt a Bitcoin treasury strategy. I became chairman about a year and a half ago and spearheaded this plan to adopt Bitcoin as our primary treasury reserve because I believed in the long-term value of Bitcoin. And we were a company much like MicroStrategy in August of 2020. The way MicroStrategy was a public company, a zombie company with a lot of cash on its balance sheet. We were in a similar situation and decided that what Michael Seyr decided to do in August 2020 made a lot of sense for us to do in May of 2024. My background is as an investor. I've spent almost my whole career. I started off as a journalist, worked for the New York Times, the Moscow News, the Oregonian newspaper, and then went on to law school and business school at Harvard, and then became an investment banker, and then went to work at a hedge fund and started my own hedge fund in 2001 called TCS Capital. And it was at one time one of the largest TMT, technology and media funds. I ran it for about 16, 17 years before I became a family office, which just means I don't have any outside investors. But I come at this as an investor in the public markets.
Amazing. I mean, just in your background, there are so many interesting things we could go into it, and not even talking about Bitcoin. That's really interesting. So, since 1.5 years you're chairman, did you start off like already as a Bitcoiner, and you're already like since the start of your chairmanship, you want to go get Bitcoin into the company?
Yeah, I've always been an investor that believes in kind of investing in things early, even though I'm a public market investor, I'm not a venture capitalist. And so I tend to look for things that are small that could get really big and mega trends, for example. And I've been good at that in my career and kind of spotting those early. So Bitcoin was naturally in that world. I wouldn't call myself a Bitcoin maximalist at all in my years as an investor running TCS, but I was always interested in it, meeting with companies in the space, investing in it. But not making it kind of my sole focus. But I had a very strong bias and real belief in Bitcoin before becoming chairman of Semler Scientific. To be honest with you, I did not expect us to do this. When I came on board, I thought we'd find a medical acquisition that would fit nicely within our portfolio with all the cash that we had. Bitcoin was not on that list of options for use of cash. It was really, buybacks, acquisitions. And we just got exhausted by looking at acquisitions that, just weren't compelling enough. And we just weren't that excited about doing a buyback. And as that was happening, Michael Saylor was broadcasting worldwide how there are all these zombie companies that should be taking their cash and buying Bitcoin. And it resonated with me, especially with, all the success he's had and my conviction that Bitcoin had a lot of upside. I think that was a lot of that was driven more by the recent events like the institutionalization, more institutions buying Bitcoin before the ETF and after the ETF, and now with the government support. Like that institutionalization theme is really what took me to that point where we got to do this. We got to buy Bitcoin. It's a great investment. It could become a great store of value, and there's no better use of our cash.
It's amazing because like if companies have too much cash, it's like buybacks, dividends, other acquisitions. That's all of the ideas they have, and it's like why not Bitcoin? I'm always asking like there are big companies like Apple, Microsoft, and all those companies that sit on so much cash, and it would be so easy to just like allocate like 1% or like 2% to Bitcoin. It would be zero risk for them because if they lose it all, like it wouldn't make any difference at all.
Right.
It's like, what do you think it's taking them so long? Is it the processes of a big business?
There's a lot of different reasons behind it. I mean, it's extremely hard for an embedded board that's getting paid nicely to keep the company stable and to not rock the boat, to not do something that they consider risky and volatile, like adopting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So that's a starting point. You kind of just need to look at the boards of these companies. And I've been an investor for 25 years. I meet with CEOs and CFOs all the time. And I now more frequently, now that Semler's pursuing this strategy, I ask them point blank, why don't you consider taking all that cash and buying Bitcoin? So I meet companies all the time that are like ours, that have a lot of excess cash. And they usually just laugh at you. They think you're kidding when you raise the idea. It's still, the Overton window really hasn't shifted for these guys. It's still considered kind of a fringe move. And you can see that by the fact that there just aren't that many companies actually doing this. I'm not that hopeful. I think we were able to do it because our board was very cohesive. We own more than 30% of the stock. We were very aligned with our other shareholders. Most boards aren't. Most boards are just people trying to clip a coupon, collect a check every quarter for signing documents and checking boxes. So I think our best chance of this changing and where you see companies start to take some of their cash and buy Bitcoin is the repeal of SAB 121. I think that the lack of really durable custody from major banks has been a major deterrent. I think once that changes, which should happen in the next few months, I think you were actually going to see very big companies taking some cash and buying Bitcoin. I think that's a huge impediment that's being lifted.
Interesting. How much is also the price developments playing into this? Is like once the price is like 500,000 or a million, is then it's deemed to be more secure. It's deemed to be a bigger market cap. Is like Bitcoin too small of a thing still for some big companies?
I think it's more the custody issue. I think what they'll probably say at that point is it's too expensive. We missed it. So, but no, I don't know. Maybe that's possible. I think it's more the lack of security and custody that they can kind of fall back on as a crutch. I think mainly, it's a relatively easy argument to make to boards, right? You have this asset class that isn't small. I mean, if you just take Bitcoin, it's about 2 trillion, but all of crypto is bigger. But just focusing on Bitcoin, it's 2 trillion. It has such similar characteristics to gold, and it's better than gold because it's digital and decentralized, et cetera. That it has so much upside relative to the value of gold that should be relatively easy for people to just understand, not necessarily embrace, but they should understand that there's this valuation gap, and they understand gold. Most people understand that gold is this store of value. They can't explain why maybe, but most people accept that gold is a store of value. And so once that shouldn't be that difficult given the disparity in valuation. I think that's what's going to also help people convert. When it is at a million, when Bitcoin is at a million, it'll probably have replaced gold as a store of value. It'll probably be something that is less volatile, actually. Like when there's a tariff crisis or there's violence in the Middle East, and Bitcoin is the only thing trading on the weekend, and it expresses the fears out there that investors have in the markets as they head into the week. It may be a different story. It may act like gold by then. If it's at a million, it's probably proven itself enough and institutionalized enough that all of a sudden it's a place you go to hide, right? It's a place to hide at that point. And by then it'll probably be a no-brainer for companies to say, oh, well, this is safe. This might be safer than gold because it's portable and it's decentralized and no one controls it, et cetera.
Interesting. And till it comes to that point, we probably need big companies that have a unique setting of like there's 1-2 persons in charge of the board and 1-2 person, maybe like even a Meta, a Facebook that is kind of founder led, and that one person has a lot of influence of like where the company is going. That's why Tesla is also in like Elon basically just made the decision. I mean, they have compared to what they can buy almost no Bitcoin. I think like 10,000 Bitcoin or something like that. Compared to what they would be able to do. I would like to...
Jack Dorsey, too, is another example of that.
Oh, yeah, Jack Dorsey, yeah.
Let's
focus on like what are you currently doing with convertible offerings and basically pushing you to the top 10, as you said, in the companies that hold Bitcoin. What did you do there, and how is it going so far?
It's going really well. What happened was we have been using our operating cash flow and to buy Bitcoin, which has been pretty solid. And then we've also used an ATM, an at-the-market offering, to sell stock to buy Bitcoin. And then we decided to take the next step and put some leverage on our balance sheet to create kind of a levered opportunity to own Bitcoin through these convertibles. We did a convertible notes offering at the end of January for $100 million. And we've used most of the proceeds to buy Bitcoin, $88.5 million we used to buy Bitcoin, recently announced that. The reason we wanted to tap the convertible market because it was less dilutive to our shares. We were able to, through a capped call facility, we were able to create a conversion price at $107 roughly versus, almost over 100% upside, actually a little less than 100% upside to where our stock was trading that day. And so we like that idea of raising capital at a very high conversion price, less dilution to where our stock trades, and also to raise more capital than we've raised than we do, on a weekly basis using our ATM. So it gave us a really good kind of chunk of capital to buy Bitcoin in a pretty quick way. We did it overnight, actually. It was an overnight offering. So there wasn't a lot of marketing or preparation ahead of that. We did kind of a blitz with investors who were interested. We started out with a $75 million offering, but it was multiple times oversubscribed. So we ended up increasing the size of the offering and ended up raising $100 million pretty quickly, which was great. And I think that the bonds have been trading decently, and we are just really fired up to have been able to pull that off. And it's senior to our equity, and it's debt. It's so the other important aspect of it is it's 5.5 years debt. So we wanted to tap the debt markets for long-term kind of durable capital. We didn't want to have anything short-term. We didn't want the ability for investors to call it or to put it, back to us. And so we were able to get, real long-term, capital, 5.5 years, with no put. So, we're really thrilled about that. And it fits in nicely too with the story of our medical business, which is, has some really nice green shoots that, we're excited about. So, raising long-term debt was really a feather in our cap.
Yeah, like the long term aspect is so important with Bitcoin because it
Yeah,
can be very volatile in the short term. But like with 5 years, 5.5 years, you're on a very safe side. It's like
yeah,
almost risk free. Always like there's no risk free, but that is really,
yeah.
really cool. What is actually going back to basics, maybe a little bit? What is the key factor that convinced you and then also the boards to go not with the traditional route of buybacks and other things and go really hard hard into Bitcoin with that strategy?
I mean, adopting the strategy in the first place.
Oh yeah.
Y- Yeah, I think it was. I think that it was this frustration of looking at so many acquisitions and never feeling that convinced that they were going to work and that they were going to generate great returns for us with our cash. We weren't getting any credit for our cash. Our stock was underperforming. We were unloved stock, and we we didn't see any acquisition that was going to make people love us anymore than they were unloving us. So it really wasn't compelling, the acquisition side, even though we probably spent a year looking at dozens of acquisitions and getting very close with some. The buyback is interesting. I think buybacks can make sense at times. They're tax efficient. But the issue is when you're a small stock and you're not getting a lot of attention and you buy shares, you're kind of reducing the liquidity in your stock, which makes it even less attractive for a lot of investors. And sometimes you can't control, the buybacks have, there's a lot of restrictions on when you can buy stock. If you have inside information as a board, you can't, you have to, or you have earnings blackouts. So it wasn't that efficient or compelling and wasn't going to really give us this kind of step function improvement in our valuation. And so it just wasn't that compelling. And when we were listening, I personally was listening to Michael Seyr a lot and kind of just stunned that nobody had really followed in his footsteps. And this guy had taken a company like ours, with a similar profile of a lot of cash, making up a lot of its market cap, and taking it in only 4 years to $100 billion valuation from 500. And as I'm an investor following the stock market and a shareholder of his company, how can you not take notice of that? Right. And so what I did initially was through my friend Tom Lee, Fundstrat. I'm on the board of Fundstrat. Tom and I are very close and have been for a long time. He connected me to Michael Seyr. I didn't know Michael personally. And, and Michael was just incredibly gracious and welcoming and loved the idea of us pursuing this. It was very helpful in kind of just giving us, tips about how to pursue this, the administrative aspect of it, the legal, the accounting. There's a lot of nuts and bolts that you have to kind of get figured out before you just go do this. And so it took several weeks, but the idea of going to the board and being able to explain why this made sense. I think his playbook, his example, the value that Michael created was a real, obviously had a lot to do with our board, being biased in favor of doing this and seeing his example and seeing very clearly how we could somehow pursue a similar strategy and really be the first company to do that after him, And so coincidentally, Metaplanet in Japan was, I guess, thinking the same way. We almost did this simultaneously. We didn't know each other, but it's interesting that we almost like to the day just made this announcement. And it's great to see how they're doing, but it's just interesting that really, I mean, there have been some announcements since ours, but nobody's really pursued it in the type of scale that we have, other than MicroStrategy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. That it took a while, and then I'm still fascinated by like how few companies do that strategy. Like I cannot go and get over that.
And I have to give a lot of credit to our board. These were people that really didn't know that much about Bitcoin, didn't really own Bitcoin, but were open-minded enough to to listen and to not just to me, but to Michael Saylor's podcast and to other people. We had some experts on Bitcoin come in and talk to our board about, educating us on the strategy. And they were really, they really put in the time. They were very, they became convinced that it made a lot of sense. And since then, since May of 24, they have just been full-fledged on board, never flinched. We initially, when we bought Bitcoin in May of 24, we bought it pretty in bulk with most of our cash. And I think to the minute we finished buying Bitcoin with like 60 million plus of it, all the cash, most of the cash on our balance sheet, the Mt. Gox news came out that there was going to be this big distribution, and then that sent Bitcoin lower. And then the Germans announced they were selling Bitcoin or started selling Bitcoin. That took Bitcoin even lower. And I think at one point we might have been down 25% on our first purchase of Bitcoin. And to our board's credit, they didn't flinch. They just wanted to buy more, and we just continued doing that. And then we recently announced when we released preliminary numbers for the fourth quarter that we made a $29 million gain on the Bitcoin we had purchased last year. So that's significant when you have 9 million shares and you make close to $30 million in a quarter. It's profound.
Yeah, it seems to be like there's this education gap. Like once you close the education gap to Bitcoin, the only question in your mind is like, how do I get more Bitcoin? Like how do I get even more? And then you get creative. And I'm amazed by what MicroStrategy is doing. And I have a hard time figuring out all the things, how he comes from like a 500 million cash balance to like making $42 billion offerings. Like my mind cannot comprehend that.
Yeah.
But it also has paid off really well for your company. Maybe to give the people a little bit more of a grasp of like how well it has been already playing for Semler Scientific. How many Bitcoin have you acquired? What is kind of the upside on that, and what has it done to your company?
Yeah, sure. So we've acquired, we've announced 3,192 Bitcoin purchases. So we own a little over $300 million of Bitcoin as we're speaking now. We still have a little bit of cash on our balance sheet for working capital in our business. And our business is generating a few $1 million of operating cash flow a quarter. We announced, I think, a preliminary number of 3.4 to 3.7 million of cash flow this quarter, and we'll use that to buy more Bitcoin. We also we unlocked some value. We announced that we sold a minority investment we made an investment in a medical business called Monarch Medical, and we sold a piece of our stake in that and collected a few $1 million, which we used to buy more Bitcoin. So we generated I think we've generated like 150% Bitcoin yield since we started this process last year. And so we're fully committed to it, in terms of just generating more Bitcoin yield and high Bitcoin yield and, making our Bitcoin story even bigger and hopefully, we're going to really go nuts in terms of Bitcoin. I believe strongly in the upside of this, this commodity.
Really interesting. Well, but for the people that maybe never heard Bitcoin yield, because like people confuse, I think the term yield and Bitcoin, because like there is no yield on Bitcoin, but there's a Bitcoin yield now. What is a Bitcoin yield, the metric?
Well, I think of Bitcoin yield as just how good are we at creatively buying Bitcoin. And meaning how are we adding value to our equity by buying Bitcoin, and how are we buying it in a way that's accretive to our shareholders? So that's how I think about it.
So it's basically of like how effective are you in getting more Bitcoin with your financial games that you're playing? Basically, that's a really good metric. Is that I'm looking forward to like when more people figured it out, when more companies figured it out, how the financial side of things work. Is the single most interesting metric maybe Bitcoin per share, or like how many Bitcoin you can accumulate per year more than last year? How do you think the impact of Bitcoin long term will be on the financial markets overall?
Um, I, in terms of, I think what's going to end up happening is that like I said earlier, the repeal of SAB 121, I think has this kind of underestimated positive impact institutionally on Bitcoin. So I think that once uh, there's clear improvement in custody, and that we have major, highly capitalized banks around the world, like the JP Morgans, the Bank Americas, the UBSs, custodying Bitcoin, I think that's going to have a massive institutional impact, positive impact on Bitcoin prices. And I think it's difficult to time that because it's not implemented yet, but it was just basically SAB 121 was just repealed. So it'll take a little bit of time for banks to gear up for this. But once it starts happening, I think that there's this, like this hyper institutionalization of Bitcoin, which will, I think, have a massive impact on institutional demand to own Bitcoin.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really good. What I'm also want to get at is like on an individual level, if you adopt Bitcoin, and I know it because I'm actually getting most of my income now paid in Bitcoin, and I'm in the situation where I just have to either borrow against my Bitcoin or spend my Bitcoin, and I really don't want to spend my Bitcoin. Like I really never want to get
Yeah.
into my Bitcoin. But if I have fiat laying around, I'm more like, oh, let's spend it, like let's put it somewhere. It does some weird things with your mind. Maybe the question is more like, what does it do when companies get more and more into Bitcoin? The same thing as like an individual getting more cautious with like spending anything else except of Bitcoin. Now, one aspect you already mentioned, you sold shares in other companies, and you already bought Bitcoin with that.
I get what you're saying. Okay, so how does the corporate mindset kind of how is it impacted once it's kind of indoctrinated by Bitcoin?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I think I think it has a similar impact as it does on an individual. I think like, you once you become a believer, you get very highly convicted, and you do want to own more of it because you see its potential. And as a board, you're looking for pennies on the ground. You want to find whatever, scraps, coins, bills, whatever there is out there to buy Bitcoin. You want to buy it. And you do want to do it, though, in an intelligent, measured way, more, I'd say, than you would as an individual. Maybe not. We think we have a very methodical way about buying Bitcoin. We think about where our stock price is trading versus the price of Bitcoin. We track that closely. And we think about the valuation, obviously, of our business versus, our Bitcoin holdings. So we're thinking about those things. And I'd say that most of the time we feel really great about that and being able to buy Bitcoin with our cash. There obviously could be dislocations where your stock price is trading at a discount to your Bitcoin holdings, and you don't want to sell your stock. And that there could be hypothetical scenarios like that, but we don't expect that to happen. And but we're methodical enough because we have kind of a plan in place for how we think about where we should be buying Bitcoin, where we should be selling our stock to buy Bitcoin, or where it's accretive, right? Where we can create this Bitcoin, this high Bitcoin yield by doing that. And so we look at that closely, but we are kind of propelled by this conviction that we want to own as much as we can. That this is a really great price to buy Bitcoin because of it, a lot of reasons, but I'd say the main one for me is just its potential to replace gold, and that it has it's trading at such a massive discount to gold.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. It's super interesting. Also, even if you look at the extending life of the company, once you have an asset that gets more in purchasing power, and you don't have to look into like what it's doing, because if you buy a company, the management team can go in the wrong direction or something like that. With Bitcoin, it kind of when I had Seyr on the podcast, he kind of went into this topic of like, if you want to make your company immortal, you buy Bitcoin and you hold it there, and it could make your company go immortal and extend the life extremely long. I love the concept of like having Bitcoin as the core of the business and then feeding from that and investing in very intelligent moves and moving the company forward. It's super interesting what impacts Bitcoin will have on the companies.
Yeah, it's interesting. We do have a kind of a varied story in that regard, because we do have this medical business, and we have a product called QuantaFlow that before we adopted the Bitcoin treasury strategy, our stock went from $1 a share to $150 a share in over a 2 or 3 year period, because this product was so dynamic and so beloved by our customers, who are the large healthcare insurance companies. And they made billions of dollars off of this product of ours, and it's this simple, easy to use device to measure people for vascular diseases. And this product has super high margins too. So we generated tremendous cash flow, and we can continue to do that. We're looking at other products with the same device. We're hoping for FDA approval soon, this year, hopefully. And that will enable us to kind of have this feeder into our Bitcoin treasury strategy. So we believe that we have this great customer base that loves our products, that it doesn't require us to put in a lot of CapEx to fuel. And therefore, we have kind of a great flywheel where we can organically generate free cash flow that feeds into our Bitcoin treasury strategy. And hopefully, we'll have a product like our one for peripheral artery disease that will be able to kind of generate that type of those type of returns that it created before. That product, when at its peak, our stock had a $1 billion valuation just on that one product.
I love that. It let me think about Bitcoin companies. As kind of like a Bitcoin flywheel. You have that Bitcoin treasury, plus you have companies on top of that generate, have an operating business, and they have unique opportunities to put on debt offerings, bond offerings, which they can basically put the Bitcoin they would have bought maybe in a year already now, which makes a huge difference, which makes products like an ETF that bundles Bitcoin companies together really interesting to think about. Like there's like then the diversification of like different companies, and there's like the hopefully an outpace of Bitcoin in there. It's almost like a Bitcoin leverage if you want to buy something like that. It's super interesting to think about those things, and then as a contrast to other things.
Yeah, as we went through that acquisition process, looking for medical acquisitions before we adopted the treasury strategy, it was valuable because we realized that we could probably do a lot of things internally that we were looking at, and that we should explore those ideas and just do them organically, because we have this great customer base, this great healthcare customer base that we can feed products into. They like us, we've done well for them. And so why not just try to feed them things that, that don't require a lot of investment and that will hopefully generate high margins that, then allow us to buy more Bitcoin.
Interesting. Have you already implemented, or maybe looking into implementing other things along with Bitcoin, like running a full node, like investing in mining, or like paying bonuses in Bitcoin, or anything like touching Bitcoin outside of using it as a treasury asset?
No, I think that we're not really interested in anything like that. I think what we're interested in is just owning as much Bitcoin as we possibly can. I know people ask me a lot, would you loan it out and so forth, but we're looking really for long-term, capital. We're not looking to be mark to market, having the vicissitudes of, the volatility, I guess, of loaning Bitcoin out and having to worry about the mark to market. We're not going to get into that game. In terms of like Bitcoin businesses outside of this, no, I think we just want it to be, all about owning Bitcoin and continuing to have a lot of optionality in our healthcare business. And, if we can get the FDA approval for a product for heart dysfunction, it's called, we don't know the timing of it, but we're waiting for the FDA to get back to us on it. Then, that could open up just a huge opportunity for us that will just, I think, really, really jumpstart more Bitcoin purchases.
I love that. Yeah, like it's you kind of, as a Bitcoiner, you cheer for other Bitcoiners because you're all working on the same thing. As like if you're doing good, it's good for me. If I'm doing good, it's good for you. Like this kind of like it's an amazing thing that brings Bitcoiners together.
When I was listening to Elon Musk's earnings call the other night, and he was talking about his business and the outlook, and he was saying how this year, 25 is going to be an okay year because they're kind of in a transitional year, but 26, he said, it's going to be ridiculously good. And then I think 27 is going to be even more ridiculously good. And it's funny, I kind of look at our business like that. Like, this is the year we're hoping to hear from the FDA. And then if they, if we can get a positive, reception from the FDA, then I think, 26, 27, like, and it's great because we have this, long-term structured balance sheet that enables us to take advantage of that runway.
We touched on it a little bit before when we talked about like how future companies might come to Bitcoin, like companies that are already existing, but companies that then adopt Bitcoin. you mentioned the SAP 21 repeal that is really, really important. Are there any other milestones that you're looking at, like what could trigger more companies to come into Bitcoin, and the kind of the thinking behind those companies and those boards to come into Bitcoin and like play in our game?
Well, I do think the government support, if these executive orders pan out where the government's buying Bitcoin, I think that should have a big influence on corporations and probably get some of the larger ones to follow suit. Um, I think also something that really could come out of this is just more countries buying Bitcoin, right? Like bigger countries, which I think in some ways is more powerful because then these guys have huge reserves to buy Bitcoin, and then there's so many countries in the world, and there's so many countries that really need to own Bitcoin, right? The U.S. is probably low on the list of those. There are so many countries that would benefit so much from owning Bitcoin to solve a lot of their inflation issues, the debasement of their currencies, and so I think that could be a catalyst more than anything, more than individual companies buying Bitcoin.
Absolutely, yeah. They have almost unlimited amount of
Yeah,
money if they
yeah.
print it. How shocked were you when you heard about Trump embracing it and all the things? It came really quickly for me.
Me too. I was in Nashville when he gave that speech. I was there, and I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. I am especially just blown away by the support in the Senate and I guess in Congress generally, but Senator Loomis, Senator Scott, Senator Blackburn, Senator Hagerty. I mean, they're leading a charge, and that's really important. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that. A lot of people think, oh, it's President Trump. He's filling campaign promises and so forth. And does he really believe in Bitcoin, or is he into other crypto? Hard to know. But the underlying legislative activity below him is strong, and these are leaders of committees who are acting swiftly to put out legislation, working hard with the Democrats to come up with really powerful acts of Congress, and I think President Trump will support those. It's not going to veto those, and so there's so many layers of activity that really are driving this.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to stay level-headed and not be too bullish on Bitcoin. If like we talked about corporate level, now we have the national level. Always the individual level is kind of untapped. If you see the Google Trends and all the things, it seems like retail investors are far away from really entering in a big way. So we have all the things in place for a massive bull run, and we're already around 100K. So that it's kind of amazing for me to see where this could lead us the next couple of months or maybe even like years to come. Really impressive to see. Is maybe the America playing with that idea, and now the official game theory race for national strategic Bitcoin reserve?
I think so. I do believe that.
Absolutely. That will be really fun to see. I want to get one other thing into the podcast before we kind of drift off is from great people that did a lot in life, and you explained your background a little bit in the starting. I think we can learn a lot from each other. I want to kind of get like how you came to be so successful with the company, how you came up, not the story, but more of like what did you learn along the way? What was really important for you? And I'm asking that because it's really important, I think, for Bitcoiners to have to have something outside of Bitcoin. We get so passionate about Bitcoin that we kind of forget everything else, and we should get things outside of Bitcoin. So I'm also trying as a Bitcoin podcast host to get outside of Bitcoin things into the podcast. So I think with you we can learn a lot. So maybe there is one or two things you can share.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate to grow up in Oregon, which is a unique place where people think differently. And I had parents who were like that. They were entrepreneurs who were often thinking outside the box. My father, who started Semler Scientific, invented all kinds of devices throughout his life. So I was always kind of, and he at times he would get into transcendental meditation and Buddhism, and he was always just thinking outside the box, and that had a big influence on me. It kind of made me think that anything's possible, that you shouldn't be afraid to pursue whatever you think makes sense. And so that's always that ability to kind of think outside the box is always kind of helped me as an investor. And that's probably partially how I discovered that Bitcoin had this potential, as a great investment. I've also just really felt it was important to give back, and to pay it forward. I've spent a lot of my adult life coaching and helping underprivileged kids get into college through baseball. So I love baseball today. I played baseball high school and college, and it's always been kind of an important part of my life. And I live in the Bronx, and I started an academy to help a lot of underserved kids in the Bronx get college baseball scholarships. I coached the kids. I started working with them when they were 7 or 8 years old with other coaches, and we had a very major program that I think we must have helped 150, 200 kids get college baseball scholarships and become, for most of them, the first in their families to go to college. So I've always had this kind of desire to help people. And I was able to do it in a hands-on way through my love for baseball, and wanting to help a lot of the community around me succeed and get a shot in life. It started when I was coaching Little League, and just saw a lot of racism. A lot of our players were Dominican or an African American, and and when we'd go play in other parts of the country, and you hear direct insults about the kids would listen to this when they were 10 years old. We were on a field once in New Jersey, and we were in a really tight game in the championship. These kids are 10 years old and they're on the field, and the parents on the other team from a suburb in New Jersey, where most of the kids, I think all the kids were white and the parents were white, started singing the national anthem. And these kids were all our players were American citizens, but they were Dominican or black, and to see the look on their faces, when their opponents were singing the national anthem, was really scary. And singing USA, I should say, they were, as the game was getting tighter and tighter, they would be screaming USA, and it became like the USA versus the Dominican Republic. It was awful. And so then, as the years went on, we just encountered more of that. We would go to tournaments in high school down in like Georgia and Florida, and college coaches wouldn't even recruit our players because they assumed they weren't smart enough or didn't have the grades to get into their universities. So we started tutoring a lot of our players in the SAT. At that time, it was required, and we helped them, improve their SAT scores, and we ended up getting a lot of these kids into college through kind of helping them with education and helping them get better as baseball players. And that's something I'm really proud of. And I spent probably 15 years of my life, every summer on the baseball field, talking to we're coaching these kids, talking to college baseball coaches, trying to help these kids get recruited. So it's a big part of my life.
I love that. Do you think that Bitcoin might play a role in connecting the world further in eliminating those artificial borders between us, with like eliminating many currencies and stuff like that? Do you think that could play
Yes.
a role in that?
It really can. It's hard for me to grasp that because I haven't traveled enough to foreign countries to talk about Bitcoin and understand the impact it has. But from from listening to people like Jack Mallers and hearing those stories, absolutely, it's incredible to me. It's what the impact it can have, and and liberate people and give them a shot at having a happy life. Absolutely, I think at the end of the day, that's probably the most important aspect of Bitcoin.
Absolutely, really interesting. I forgot the name I'm trying to think of her, but I recently had an African woman on, and she told how Bitcoin gave her the chance to finally have finances that doesn't require her husband, her former husband, to sign, because it's common that the woman can only use the bank account if the man signs on that, which, as someone that lives now in Austria, whole his life is completely out of this world that is even existing, but it is existing. And I think in the Western countries, sometimes we are very fortunate with our positions. When we then look at other countries, we're like, oh, like they are completely different set of problems that you couldn't even think about. So I'm only getting irritated when I hear people saying, oh, like Bitcoin has no use cases, it's just for rich people. I'm like, no, like it's exactly the opposite. Yes, rich people use it because they are smart, but it's exactly not for that. So I'm really liking to get this aspect of Bitcoin as much as possible on the podcast, because it's really important to talk about. Obviously, we also like when the numbers going up, but the freedom and the inclusivity of Bitcoin is probably the more important part, as you said.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. It is an area where I would love to understand and help more.
Really cool. Perfect. And yeah, thank you so much, Eric, already. Before we have one more end routine of the podcast, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the question is from the previous guest is, what will the world look like because of Bitcoin in 50 years?
Well, I think for sure Bitcoin will be digital gold. And so it will be bigger than and play the role as the store of value and safe haven in the world, to hopefully save whatever debased currencies are still around. But I believe that it will become the standard for currency and for most of the people in the world.
Really, really cool. Really cool. Thank you so much for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Okay, sounds great.
Really cool. Do you have any place where people can read your stuff, Twitter and stuff like that?
I'm on Twitter. It's at Semler Eric.
Perfect. Then thank you so much, Eric, for being on. Also for everyone that's watching and listening, thank you so much for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye bye.